the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happyscientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to the Happy Scientist podcast from Bitesize Bio. If you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist, you are in the right place. I am Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, where we provide bioscience researchers with help with improving their technical skills, their soft skills and their well-being. And this podcast focuses on the latter of these three areas. The driving force of this podcast is Kenneth Vogt, who I've worked with for over 7 years now, with him being my business mentor and colleague. And I knew that his expertise could help a lot of researchers, which is why we started this podcast. In these sessions, we'll hear mostly from Ken on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. And along the way, I will pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist and from working with Ken. In episodes 1 to 9 of this podcast, we talk about the foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which we'll be referring to in all future episodes. So, if you find this episode useful, please go back and listen to episodes 1 to 9 to get an understanding of these life-changing concepts. So, let's bring in the man himself. Kenneth, how are you today?
Doing great. And I'm excited to be talking about this very interesting topic of getting past imposter syndrome. I know so many of you scientists out there are suffering from this, and I mean suffering. It's causing you great distress. And the notion of imposter syndrome, I'm sure most of us have heard this phrase before. It was coined over 40 years ago by two psychologists. It was Dr. Pauline Rose Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes. The idea of an imposter syndrome is that you think that nobody knows that you're actually a fraud, that you aren't actually the expert that everybody thinks you are. And, oh yeah, okay, fine, you got the degree and you got through the dissertation and all that, but if they only knew how you had faked it or guessed your way to this position, and they all think you're on top, but you all know the truth.
And the flip side, of course, is that everyone else who's an expert is a real expert, and they're nothing like they don't have any blind spots or any failings, unlike you, who's the only one who is the exposed imposter.
Yeah, isn't that funny? People don't look around and think, I live in a sea of imposters. No, I'm the only one.
Yeah.
So the good doctors who developed this, Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes, there's actually a test online, and we'll put a link to that test in the show notes. So you can take the imposter syndrome test and see if you in fact are suffering from this. Go ahead.
I'm guessing most people will. I'm sure I would definitely be a positive on the imposter syndrome test.
Yeah. So, but even without taking the test, I'm gonna boil it down here to what it is that makes people feel like they've got imposter syndrome. So the first most basic one is you feel like a fraud. You feel like I'm representing myself to be something that I'm not. And it doesn't matter that I have the credentials that evidence it. It doesn't matter that I've actually taken the schooling and I've actually read the books and I've actually passed the tests. They still feel like, yeah, I got lucky. I just, I took tests on a good day. I got an easygoing professor. Whatever excuse they put up before themselves, that they just can't believe. They can't have the self-confidence to accept that they are the expert that other people believe they are. And
Yeah.
they may, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, again, it's not just a professional setting thing. It's just a mindset that expresses itself, especially in a professional setting like science. It really brings it out. I was just thinking there that my son, 11 years old, he's a really great guitarist, and he writes songs and things that are really good for his age, and he doesn't want other people to listen to them because he thinks it's the same thing that's going on. It's the same mindset, even though he doesn't have a professional setting to work in. He thinks that what he's doing isn't as good as what other people are doing, and that's just a fundamental mindset.
Well, that just go to point out too that this notion of being an imposter can get instilled in us very young, and can get instilled in us even in a positive environment, because as we've talked about in past episodes, Nick actually is personally a rock star. So if he's going to encourage his own son, I promise you he's encouraging his own son. So if in that environment that his son can feel like he's faking it, it can happen to anybody.
I would like to say that I'm a bit of an imposter as a rock star, though. So that's fine. Let's keep moving on.
Well, we can use you as a case study throughout this, and we may well do so. But that's another thing that's pointed out here. We think, the reason I know I'm an imposter is because I'm an expert. See, for the average person out there that looks at me and says, "Oh, well, he's got a PhD. He's obviously, really, really an expert in this area." And it's like, yeah, well, because I'm an expert in this area, I know how much I don't know. Well, that is not evidence of you being an imposter. That is just actually that's evidence of your expertise when you've become wise enough to recognize there's much more for you to gain. But that doesn't mean you haven't come a long way already. So I want to add to some factors of how you might know that you're suffering from imposter syndrome. So the first one is you feel like a fraud. But here's the second one. You find it difficult to accept praise. So if you ever done that where somebody says, "Oh, well, you really did a great job on that," and you're like, I screwed this up here, and I dropped the ball there, and I probably should have did this, and I don't know if you noticed, but over here I did this wrong. And they just launch into this whole thing. They attack the praise that comes to them. So do you find yourself doing that? Do you find yourself unwilling to receive praise? So, that's
a big one. It's a good lever as well. I remember that was one of the early things that you said to me was, you don't accept any praise. If someone praises you, just deflect it. So stop doing that. Just try, do your best to just say nothing and just let it sink in. And that really helped me, because it's just a lever to start going in the opposite direction of this, which is essentially just a habitual mindset.
Sure. A simple thing you can do about praise is just say thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's amazing how painful that can be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the proof's in the pudding. You got to actually experience it and see what it's like. What would happen if I said thank you when somebody praised me?
Yeah. Try it a couple of times and you'll feel the pain, and then go that. Just keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, and this is a good opportunity to point out the difference between pain and suffering. Yes, it may be painful to just say thank you when you're praised. Suffering is a different game. Suffering is where you agonize over things. And you're going to find out that pain and suffering are not equatable, and they're not equally valuable. And in fact, suffering is not valuable at all, and pain is very valuable. You learn things from pain. So the next thing that might be a trigger to show you that you're suffering from imposter syndrome is that you overwork yourself. And if you think about that, here's the reason you overwork yourself is because you realize, I'm such a fake. I've got to work harder just to keep up, just to do the basics. And that's another thing you look at and you go, holy cow! If Nick Oswald thinks he's an imposter, if he's an imposter, I am a world-class imposter. So pay attention to this and learn from this. Learn from Nick's mistakes here. That's kind of the point of this. So then, now here's another one that is a really important one to give consideration to. Are you somebody who feels that failure is not an option? It's not, you cannot allow there to be failure. If that's the case, you may be suffering from imposter syndrome. Because the fact is, failure is a regular part of the scientific process. You do fail at things all the time. But again, that's kind of how you read it. Did you fail at it, or did you succeed in finding something that didn't work? If you cannot acknowledge that something went wrong, then you may be suffering from imposter syndrome. And there's nothing wrong with recognizing what's real. Science is the search for truth, right? So let's find out what's true. And part of the way to find out what's true is to find out what's not true. So I probably have been preaching to the choir here and trying to talk you into believing that you have imposter syndrome. There's probably most of you going, I already knew. You didn't need to tell me.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter what you say, I still am.
Yeah, well, there's that. But now let's spend a little time talking about what you can do about it. Because at the end of the day, it's not fun to feel like a fraud. You're constantly feeling like at some point I'm going to get caught and it's all over. And we don't know what it means that it'll be all over. I'm going to get fired from my job. I'm going to get indicted. I'm going to be on TV being shamed. What? Well, we build up this whole picture of this horrifying thing that's going to happen on our way to the gallows, But
it's interesting. So where does that come from? Because I distinctly remember coming out of my PhD and getting my first job and thinking, oh God, I don't know how I'm going to, they looked at my resume and they gave me the job based on that. I don't know how I'm going to keep them convinced that I'm the person that should be here, because I've got to perform. It's kind of like it's almost like you're not recognizing what it is that makes you valuable, if you like, because it's not I don't know, maybe you can explain that better than me, Ken. What is it that fundamentally drives that?
Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One of the points that I wanted to make about what you could do about this is that you need to recognize that how you feel about things is not the same thing as how they are. Our feelings and the truth often are remarkably unrelated. And so just because you feel like, I know I should be this, but I feel like that. Well, if your resume, I realize some people embellish your resumes, but let's just, for the sake of discussion, presume that your resume is accurate. It did describe who you actually are, what you've actually accomplished, and that's all they wanted. That's what they expected. They expected you are the guy you represented yourself to be. And so now you might feel different about it, but if you elevate your feelings above the truth, above facts, well, you're going to get yourself in all kinds of trouble. And that's not to say that your feelings are untrustworthy or they're bad or they're only there to harm you. That's not true. Feelings are giving you some evidence of something to look at. But often, all they're doing is telling you, hey, look at this. And then when you look at it and you go, yeah, you know what I was lacking here? I was lacking some self-confidence. I should have some trust here. I had some great instructors. I had great professors, and I learned a great deal from them. And I should have some confidence that they set me on the right path. Whereas until you had the feeling that, I don't know if I'm up for this, you wouldn't have made that consideration. You wouldn't have thought about it.
It's interesting. What I was kind of thinking, I was trying to form there before you then helped me form it, was that when you go and start the next job, if you like, you start in a new place, the reason you're there is not because of the grades you got or something like that. It's what's behind those grades, and that is it's who you are. It's the talent that you have, and it's having and then you're armed with knowledge. But generally, when you go into a new job, you have to arm yourself with new knowledge that's specific to this job. So really, what you're bringing is your innate talent that allowed you to get, those results that got you in the door anyway. And so it's having self-confidence, which is just trusting your own talent, if you like, and allowing that to be expressed. I think that if you flip it around, imposter syndrome is not trusting that innate talent that you have, or something like that anyway.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I recognize that what you've established isn't that you know everything. You've established I have the capacity to know what needs to be known.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let me look at the dark side of this for a second, though. You have that feeling that you're not up to snuff, and upon examination, wow, you're not. It is important to recognize when you are in fact fraudulent. Now, that's going to be a minority of the time, but I'm not telling you like, oh, don't worry about it. Everything's perfect. You've got everything you need. No, there will be moments when you don't. Well, recognize that. See where the holes are so that you know that these are holes I need to fill. That's not going to be your common experience. And even if it happens, you're going to realize, okay, I got a few weak spots here. I should deal with that. But you're rarely are you going to look at this and go, wow, you could drive a truck through the hole that I've got here. No, that doesn't happen very often. But if it does happen, get in front of it. This is the time to recognize I've got to do this. If you fake your way to this,
I would say in a scientific setting, in terms of we're thinking of the points where the imposter syndrome goes through the roof is when you start. For me anyway, it's when you start a new job, and in a scientific setting, you come with a basic, and it's probably the same in a lot of other professions, but you come with a basic set of tools. But you also come with some gaps because whatever problem you've been employed to solve, it's a whole new technical area you generally have to learn unless you've gone into something that you've completely become technically competent in previously. But a lot of the times you come in with a basic set of tools, and you've got a big amount of knowledge you've got a large amount of knowledge to acquire before you can become effective. You've got to get up to speed in the specific area of literature. You might have to learn some new techniques and stuff. And so the opposite of imposter syndrome would be thinking that you didn't have to do that work each time, that you could just wing it, and that's irresponsible. But I guess that's as you say, that's the dark side of imposter syndrome, is when if you don't acknowledge that and don't react accordingly.
Sure, and you want to take advantage of that startup phase. That's the moment when you're going to get the most slack cut for you. When it's recognized, everybody knows, hey, you're in a new job here, you're at a new company here, you're starting a new project here. Everybody understands that's the moment when you're going to need the most input. You're going to need the most to learn the most new things. Well, you need to step up in that moment. And that's not the beauty of this is recognizing that you have some holes doesn't establish that you're an imposter. In fact, it does the opposite. It's just, see, this is a person who understands themselves and understands their capabilities and their background well enough that they know what's missing, and they're going to do something about it. An imposter would pretend those holes weren't there.
Yeah, and that's the fundamental here, I think, is that the one driver of imposter syndrome is feeling like you need to know everything. And it's certainly not the case. Again, it's kind of what we were alluding to earlier, is that the reason you're here is because you have the talent to figure out whatever you need to know, or you have the ability to do that.
Well, yeah, and I think it's even worse than just that you need to know everything. It's that you think you need to project that you know everything.
Well, there is that as well.
Don't project that. Do not project that you know everything. And in fact, you'll take a lot of pressure off yourself if you're a bit more self-effacing. And I'm not talking about, like, oh, I'm an idiot and I don't know anything. I'm a worm. No, but it's like, oh, that's a new thought for me. I'm going to have to look into that. I'm going to have to look that up. I'm going to have to do a little experimentation there. All that stuff diffuses that you're an imposter. It shows like, oh no, this is somebody they've got the lights turned on. They're paying attention to what's going on here.
And so if you flip that around then to another reason why these professional settings like science are so, give rise to acute imposter syndrome, is that there's often a culture of people projecting overconfidence. And so unless everyone does, underneath that, everyone is feeling varying degrees of imposter syndrome, if you like. Well, not everyone, most people. And so by you kind of breaking that and showing more humility and more vulnerability, then you're kind of starting to break down that culture, which makes it easier for everyone else as well. So that's going to feed into your charisma, like we talked about in the last episode.
Exactly. You can not only make the world a better place, you can make your personal lab a better place.
Absolutely.
And this does point to something else that really is important. We have to have a healthier response to failures and mistakes than we've often seen exhibited around us. Mistakes, failures are a regular part of our activity and of the work you do. We can't pretend that we're going to have this environment where there's never a failure. That's not going to work. And if you're in a situation where task after task there's no option for it to fail, that's a dangerous environment. That you can't last in that environment, and you got to build in some safeties so that it's okay for there to be failures where failures are survivable. That should be part of the system. If you have a system that is so fragile that a single failure brings it all crashing down, your system is broken. So you need to work on it.
And one way to look at science is that it's 95% failures, or at least it's not that. It's that you don't go. By definition, you have to go into things not knowing what the outcome is going to be, and the outcome can be influenced by just that's the answer to the question is not what you thought it was, or that you're technically asking the question wrong and making a technical mistake and you're not seeing it. There's room for all of that in there, and all of that is part of the learning process of dealing with that as part of the learning process of becoming a great scientist. There'll be people listening to this who are at varying levels in their career, so this applies differently to different people. If you are someone who is a manager of scientists, then this is your opportunity to give them the room to fail, or for things to go wrong, if you want to put it like that. So, and then learn from it, because and then grow in that way, rather than feeling compressed because they feel like there's no room for failure, and it just feeds an anxiety that doesn't help anyone. I know that you're a big fan of Ray Dalio, who has a lot to say about that sort of creating that sort of environment, Ken.
Oh yes.
What's the summary of what Ray says about that?
What Ray is looking for exceptional people. If you don't know who Ray Dalio is, he started a company called Bridgewater Associates. It's a hedge fund. Started it from nothing. And now they manage something like $160 billion. It's one of the most successful hedge funds ever, and they're very good at what they do. But when they bring in the best of the best, and then they create this environment where they just absolutely demand that everyone see things as they actually are. You don't get to play imposter syndrome at Bridgewater Associates. It's like we all know we all have holes. And he's constantly talking about that even at the top managers, and even talking about himself, there are things I'm not good at and I'm never going to be good at. And if I sit up here and say, well, I'm the boss, I have to be good at it, or I'm the boss and everybody's just going to have to pretend I'm good at it, that doesn't work. And he creates an environment where the lowest person on the totem pole as far as management structure can speak up and correct somebody high up the structure. Now there's some rules for engagement on that. It's not like any the janitor can stir the pot with the CEO, but if they're bringing up something credible, it's treated that way, and no one is being looked down on ever. Now I know sounds like a great environment. It is a great environment, but it is also a demanding environment because everybody's expected to accept this standard. So, part of it is you got to look at yourself and you got to accentuate the positive. Of course, you can look at things about yourself and say, these are my weaknesses, but you are not made up of all weaknesses. You have got strong points, and you need to accentuate those things accurately. Realize that, okay, I may not be great at this, but over here, I'm truly an expert. And over here, I'm truly experienced. And over here, I've really walked the walk. So pay attention to the positive side of things too, and don't just indulge in this negative thinking, because it doesn't really get you anywhere.
And I guess when you're looking at in terms of things going wrong, one aspect is when things go right or you do things well, to acknowledge that, so that gives you that the confidence. But when things go wrong, is to treat them with a bit of detachment, where it's not a personal thing. So whether again you're the person who's done something wrong, or the person in your team has done something that made a mistake, it's so easy and it's so common to drive that person down because they made a mistake, and for them to take it personally, there's just nothing to be gained from that. And that's what I take from reading from what Ray Dalio does, is that they treat problems as depersonalized problems that just have to be solved, and it's not about driving a person down. That's just the easiest. Often for me, I find that when someone has made a mistake, it's actually because a system I put together is not correctly set up. But it'd be so easy for me to just say, yeah, you made a mistake. It's all your fault. I don't have to look at the system. And it's the same here. But again, the overall thing is that if we're trying to build personal confidence and respect and effectiveness and team effectiveness, then depersonalizing problems is a really important thing, and dealing with them in that detached way.
Yeah, and as much as you don't want to be living feeling that you're a fraud and an imposter, neither do your colleagues. And are you feeding into their imposter syndrome? Whether that's a peer or your boss or whoever.
Yeah, I think that's everywhere. There's a lot of that going on that I see anyway.
Right. And some people are doing, they're doing it inadvertently. But other people are doing it with glee. And boy, don't be that person. You're going to find that you will end up making enemies that will really hold back your career and really hold back your enjoyment of your work. You want to work around people that you enjoy being with, and nobody enjoys being with somebody where they feel like at any moment I could get another arrow in the back from this person. So don't be that person.
Yeah, and this sort of thing is, your own contribution to the overall culture that you work in, and depending on where you are in the hierarchy, you can have more or less influence, but everyone can have an influence, and changing that culture for the positive helps everyone, especially if you work in a something as important as science. The better we can get science working, the better it is for the world. So it really gets that big.
Yeah, exactly. There's something bigger going on here than just you. And recognize that if you're in an environment and you're feeling, there's some toxicity in this environment, take some personal responsibility there and say, you know what? I'm not going to be a part of that. Even if I'm not going to stop it, I'm at least not going to be a part of it. And maybe you can also help stop it. Maybe you can lead by example and show the people there's a better way. Now, one of the things you can do for yourself along those lines is cut yourself some slack. And sometimes you're not going to be perfect. Everybody's not firing on all cylinders at every moment. Everybody ebbs and flows throughout the day. So, if you're cutting other people's slack, cut yourself some slack too. And, give yourself a chance to not have to be perfection at every given moment.
Is it true to say that you're never perfect though? That's how I would look at it.
Well, there'll be a link to an article in the show notes to an article entitled "Perfectionism is Setting the Bar Too Low." So I will leave that concept in front of you to think about it. Like, perfectionism doesn't work. It really doesn't work, and that article will deal with that a little bit more. So I'll leave that as a teaser out there for you, but you can take a look.
So that's in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's another thing: is change the dialogue in your head. Are you sitting there all day long going, "Oh, that was stupid. Well, man, what was wrong with me?" I'm like, "Well, here I go again." Or like, "Oh man, I am such a lazy piece of uselessness." Think about your internal dialogue and how much is going on there. Are you constantly taking little shots at yourself? And that really adds to this burden of feeling like you're a fake. So stop it. When you hear that kind of thing, the first thing is to notice it. When it's like, well, that was stupid of me. I'm like, oh, look at that. Look what I just said to myself. Once you've acknowledged it multiple times in a row, now you can start combating it. Now you can go, that was stupid. It's like, okay, stupid's a pretty strong word. No, there was a mistake. That was it. So, you could start to change the dialogue, and then you'll start to realize that, that voice that says I'm stupid, that's not me. Those are just thoughts that kind of wandered on by, and I decided to give it meaning. I heard this great way of looking at this that I just love to share. So, a bird can land on your head, but you don't have to let it build a nest there. And that's what thoughts are. And so we have these little thoughts that come by that are potentially harmful to us. Don't worry that you had the thought. Don't beat yourself up like, there it is, I called myself stupid again. You're like, no, the thought came up. Whether or not you're going to take ownership of it now is a choice you can make. And you can make it time after time, and you can reject it time after time. And after you do that, it doesn't actually take that long. It'll stop coming up, or it'll start coming up less frequently. Or it'll take more demanding circumstances before it comes up, until you get to a point where you know what, I've let that one go. So give yourself that kind of mental hygiene. Clean this stuff out of your brain. Don't just accept it. Don't let it go by and just like, oh well, I guess I'm stupid because the thought came to me. No, it's just a thought.
I think we could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, and everybody's doing it. We all have this constant dialogue going on in our head. I say dialogue. Often it's just monologue. Although it is interesting when it becomes dialogue. It's like, you're stupid. No, I'm not. Wait a minute. And you'll find yourself having these little arguments in your head sometimes, and it's and that's actually an improvement. And then you'll stop having those arguments. So, but it's a process. You just got to get engaged in it. Have some experience with it. Stop taking for granted that these thoughts are my thoughts. That's another phony notion. And here. There may be another article I have to put in here, a link to another article that talks about stopping thinking, because you might think, how do you stop thinking? Well, it can be done. So, yeah.
Definitely. I think that's something to cover. I mean, stopping thinking, it sounds like that. I think it's stopping a particular kind of thinking, really.
Well, and it's recognizing, too, that, wait a minute, I'm not actually doing this thinking. These are just thoughts that happen by.
Yeah.
So now taking you out of your own head for a minute, and then going back to what we said, one of the ways of knowing that that you've got imposter syndrome is that you find it difficult to accept praise. And the answer to that is to accept praise.
Wow. That's an amazing.
Yeah, so many times we want to have, well, give me the 10-step process to solve this. And it's like, no, it's a 1-step process. Stop doing what you're doing.
This is an easy one because it literally, it's quite hard, the dialogue in your head or the monologue in your head and not believing your own thoughts and stuff. I find that quite difficult because you're just so tuned into, or you're so trained to think that those mean something. But actually, I find this quite easy, the accepting. Well, I found starting off on it because it's very obvious. All you have to say is, someone's praised me. Okay, now I'm not going to say no. And so yeah, that's quite. But it gives a lot of starts to build a lot of momentum in moving you away from feeling like a fraud. Yeah.
And it's something I've done with many of my coaching clients, and perhaps I've done this to you, Nick, I don't know, but maybe somebody else has done it to you, where I've given you a compliment and you try to deflect it, and I say, it was a compliment, just say thank you. Oh, yeah. And by the way, that's something you can do with other people.
That's just what I was thinking. Yeah. As we're trying to do this kind of change the culture that's around us for our own good and for other people's, then that's quite a forceful thing. I'm going to be using that now. I forgot about that. Okay.
Yeah, because this is the thing too. If you have suffered from imposter syndrome, you know that other people are suffering too, and so we don't want anybody to suffer. We don't want our colleagues to suffer. We don't want our bosses to suffer. We don't want our subordinates to suffer. Let's help alleviate suffering. In fact, that's kind of what science is often about, is we're trying to improve the human condition. Well, you can improve the human condition just with some of these simple things here. And it's going to make a better environment that will multiply this improvement of the human condition. So, Nick, do you still feel like an imposter?
I'm Scottish, so it's kind of been built, but I'm always moving away from it.
Well, good. Keep up the good work on that. Okay, well, I'd say that is a wrap on the topic of getting past imposter syndrome, and look into the show notes for some interesting articles that can give you a little more information. And also, we'll have a link to the imposter syndrome test so you can see if you in fact qualify.
Yeah, so the show notes are available. This is episode 10 of the Happy Scientist podcast. You can find the podcast at bitesizebio.com/the Happy Scientist. So if you look that up and then look for episode 10, you will find the notes on what we've been talking about today. Other housekeeping is that, as I mentioned in the introduction, that a lot of what we're talking about is based on the foundational principles that we set out in episodes 1 to 9, where we covered human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which are tools that can really help you to get under the skin of this kind of these mindsets that are holding you back and start moving them in a more positive direction. So I'd really recommend you go back and listen to episodes 1 to 9 if you find this interesting. And finally, you can join us in the private Facebook group for this podcast, which is called the Happy Scientist Club, which is at facebook.com/the Happy Scientist Club, all one word. And in there, we'll be looking at this stuff from all sorts of different angles and chatting about it and so on. So that will give you more depth into the topics and approaches that we're talking about here. So thank you again for another great contribution, Ken. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.